The greatest mistake you can make is believing that a person's uniform tells you the full story. Another sunrise settled over Bayside Regional Medical Center in San Diego, California, bringing with it the familiar rhythm of another busy day inside the emergency department. Nurses prepared medication carts, physicians reviewed overnight cases, and paramedics moved steadily through the ambulance entrance as monitors quietly echoed throughout the halls. To everyone beginning another shift, it looked like an ordinary morning. No one imagined that before the day ended, a single moment would forever change how an entire hospital viewed one quiet nurse. If you enjoy inspiring stories about courage, hidden strength, and extraordinary people who quietly change the lives of others, thank you for supporting our channel. Your encouragement, every thoughtful comment, every like, and every subscription allow us to continue sharing meaningful stories with viewers around the world. Please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel so we can continue bringing you unforgettable journeys and even more inspiring experiences in the videos ahead. Olivia Carter quietly adjusted her light blue scrubs, secured her identification badge, and began checking the emergency department supply carts with the same careful attention she showed every morning. At 31 years old, she had earned a reputation for being dependable, calm under pressure, and remarkably kind to patients. She greeted every coworker with a warm smile, thanked the overnight staff for their hard work, and stopped to reassure an elderly patient who seemed nervous while waiting for morning tests. She never hurried, never complained, and never attempted to draw attention to herself. Most people believed she was simply an experienced emergency room nurse who preferred working quietly in the background. Olivia never encouraged anyone to think differently. Across the department, Chief Trauma Surgeon Dr. Richard Hayes stepped through the double doors with his usual commanding presence. Every physician, resident, and nurse immediately recognized his confident stride. He was respected for his exceptional surgical skill, but he was equally known for expecting complete obedience inside the trauma unit. He believed decisions belonged to physicians, while everyone else followed instructions without question. As he reviewed the morning schedule, he noticed Olivia carefully speaking with a newly hired nurse about organizing emergency supplies more efficiently. Before the younger nurse could respond, Dr. Hayes interrupted the conversation. "Nurse Carter," he called firmly. Olivia turned immediately. "Yes, doctor?" Hayes glanced briefly at the organized supply cart before looking directly at her. "I appreciate initiative, but your responsibility is to support the medical team, not instruct it." The younger nurse lowered her eyes, clearly uncomfortable. Olivia answered calmly, "I was only showing her where the emergency equipment is stored." Hayes folded his arms. "Then allow senior clinical staff to provide guidance next time. Your job is to assist, not to make decisions." Several nearby employees quietly exchanged glances. Nobody challenged the surgeon. Olivia simply nodded with quiet professionalism. "Understood, doctor." Hayes continued walking through the department without another word. Rebecca Lawson, the charge nurse with more than 20 years of emergency experience, watched the exchange from the central nurses' station. She had seen Olivia accept criticism before, yet the younger nurse never appeared resentful. Instead, she quietly returned to checking equipment, helping coworkers, and comforting patients exactly as she had moments earlier. Rebecca often wondered where that remarkable composure came from. Before she could continue the thought, the distant sound of approaching military vehicles echoed outside the ambulance entrance. Security officers immediately looked toward the front drive. Several emergency department employees paused what they were doing as two dark government vehicles rolled beneath the hospital canopy. Olivia briefly lifted her eyes toward the entrance before calmly returning a package of sterile dressings to the supply cart, showing no reaction at all to the arrival that instantly captured everyone else's attention. The two dark government vehicles came to a smooth stop beneath the emergency department entrance, immediately drawing the attention of security officers and several members of the trauma team. The rear door of the lead vehicle opened, and a group of military personnel carefully assisted a Navy SEAL into the hospital. Although he appeared physically exhausted from a demanding assignment, his posture still reflected years of discipline and quiet confidence. Senior Chief Mason Brooks thanked the service members accompanying him before walking into Bayside Regional Medical Center with calm determination. His arrival was not dramatic. Yet everyone instinctively sensed they were welcoming someone accustomed to extraordinary responsibility. Dr. Richard Hayes stepped forward without hesitation. "Good morning," he said confidently. "I am Dr. Richard Hayes, Chief Trauma Surgeon. We are prepared to take excellent care of you." Mason nodded respectfully. "Thank you, doctor." His voice remained steady, revealing little emotion. Hayes immediately directed several physicians to begin the standard evaluation while nurses prepared an examination room. The emergency department shifted into its familiar routine, with every staff member carrying out assigned responsibilities. Olivia Carter quietly gathered fresh supplies, confirmed medication availability, and ensured the treatment area was fully prepared before the patient arrived. She never attempted to move into the center of the activity. She simply completed every task with calm precision. As Mason entered the treatment area, his attention briefly moved across the room, taking in the physicians, nurses, and equipment surrounding him. Then, almost without warning, his eyes settled on Olivia. He became completely still. Dr. Hayes continued explaining the examination process, assuming the patient was simply listening carefully. Mason heard every word, yet his attention never truly left the quiet nurse standing near the medication cart. Olivia remained focused on reviewing patient documentation, never appearing to notice the prolonged glance. Rebecca Lawson quietly observed the unusual moment from the nurse's station. She had seen patients recognize familiar faces before, but this felt different. There was no confusion in Mason's expression. Instead, it resembled someone discovering something he had believed impossible. "Senior Chief Brooks?" Dr. Hayes asked politely. "Is everything all right?" Mason blinked once before answering. "Yes, doctor." His eyes briefly returned to Olivia. "I thought I recognized someone." Hayes smiled reassuringly. "Nurse Carter has been with our department for some time now. She is dependable, professional, and an excellent member of our staff." The surgeon paused before adding with quiet confidence, "She assists the team very well." Rebecca noticed the wording immediately. Hayes still viewed Olivia primarily as someone who followed instructions rather than someone capable of leading under pressure. Mason simply nodded without offering an opinion. Meanwhile, Olivia approached another patient waiting nearby, adjusted a blanket over the patient's shoulders, answered several reassuring questions, and quietly wished the family a peaceful morning. Every movement reflected patience, kindness, and remarkable composure. Mason watched the interaction carefully, and a faint expression of recognition crossed his face once more. It was not simply her appearance that held his attention. It was the way she carried herself, the calm confidence in every decision, and the quiet habit of making everyone around her feel safe without ever seeking recognition. Rebecca followed his gaze again, becoming increasingly convinced that the military visitor and the quiet nurse shared a connection neither of them had acknowledged. As Olivia finished documenting routine observations and prepared to leave the treatment area, Mason slowly drew a deeper breath. His eyes remained fixed on her for another moment before an almost imperceptible smile appeared. Somewhere deep within his memory, a forgotten chapter had begun to reopen, and everyone inside the emergency department was only moments away from witnessing a conversation that would change how they viewed the quiet nurse forever. Senior Chief Mason Brooks remained seated on the examination bed, yet his attention followed Olivia Carter every time she crossed the treatment area. She moved through the emergency department with quiet confidence, checking patient charts, speaking gently with anxious families, and helping younger nurses without ever drawing attention to herself. To everyone else, she looked like a dedicated emergency room nurse performing another ordinary shift. To Mason, every movement awakened memories he had believed would remain locked away forever. Dr. Richard Hayes reviewed the preliminary assessment before turning toward Olivia. "Nurse Carter," he said firmly, "prepare the standard observation paperwork and leave the treatment decisions to the physicians." Olivia answered immediately, "Yes, doctor." Without the slightest hint of frustration, she accepted the instruction and quietly continued her work. Mason watched the exchange in complete silence. Rebecca Lawson noticed the subtle change in his expression. It was not irritation. It was disappointment. He seemed uncomfortable watching someone he clearly respected being spoken to, as though her judgment carried little value. A younger resident stepped beside Dr. Hayes and quietly asked a question about the patient's evaluation. Hayes answered confidently before adding, Experience teaches people when to lead and when to follow. That lesson is especially important in emergency medicine. Although the comment was directed toward the resident, several staff members glanced briefly at Olivia, recognizing the familiar implication. She never reacted. Instead, she calmly helped another nurse organize laboratory requests before reassuring a worried father whose young daughter was waiting for routine imaging. Mason continued observing her with growing certainty. It was not simply her face that felt familiar. It was the way she naturally assessed every room she entered, the quiet awareness of everyone's needs, and the effortless calm that settled around her whenever she spoke. Those qualities could not be taught in a classroom alone. They had been shaped by responsibilities far greater than anyone inside the hospital seemed to imagine. Rebecca walked toward Olivia carrying several patient charts. "Would you mind helping me review these after your current assignment?" she asked. Olivia smiled warmly. Of course. Before they could continue, Dr. Hayes called across the department once more. "Nurse Carter, once you finish there, assist with equipment inventory. The trauma team will handle everything else." "Yes, doctor," Olivia replied with the same respectful tone. Mason slowly lowered his eyes for a brief moment. Rebecca noticed and quietly approached him. "Is something bothering you?" she asked. Mason hesitated before answering. Only that some people mistake quiet professionalism for limited ability. Rebecca studied him carefully. "You seem to know her." Mason gave the smallest nod. "I believe I do." Rebecca waited, expecting him to explain, but he remained silent. Across the room, Olivia finished speaking with another patient and turned toward the supply cabinet. She had no idea that nearly every movement she made was being quietly compared with memories from years earlier. Dr. Hayes stepped into the hallway to answer a phone call, leaving the treatment area unusually quiet. Mason watched Olivia approach with a clipboard containing routine paperwork. She smiled politely, exactly as she had with every patient that morning. "Good morning," she said. "I just need to confirm a few details for your medical record." Mason looked directly into her eyes. For several long seconds, neither of them spoke. Then recognition became unmistakable. Olivia's calm expression remained unchanged, but Mason could see the brief flicker of understanding she tried so carefully to conceal. The certainty he had been searching for settled completely into his mind. He knew he was no longer looking at an ordinary emergency room nurse, and before another minute passed, the entire department would begin discovering the same extraordinary truth. Olivia Carter quietly reviewed the final page of Mason Brooks's admission paperwork before offering him a reassuring smile. "Everything looks good," she said gently. "The physician will be back in just a moment." Mason never looked away from her. The certainty in his expression had grown stronger with every passing minute. Across the treatment area, Dr. Richard Hayes finished his telephone call and returned with confident strides, immediately noticing that Olivia was still speaking with the patient. "Nurse Carter," he called firmly. Olivia turned at once. "Yes, doctor?" Hayes glanced toward the chart in her hands. "The trauma team is about to continue the evaluation. Step back and allow the physicians to handle the discussion." Olivia calmly handed the paperwork to another nurse. "Of course." She moved aside without hesitation, showing the same professionalism she had displayed throughout the morning. Mason watched the exchange carefully. Rebecca Lawson noticed the subtle tightening of his expression. It was not anger. It was the unmistakable look of someone witnessing a respected leader being treated as though her voice carried little importance. Dr. Hayes began discussing the next stage of the examination with several residents, explaining each decision with the confidence of a surgeon accustomed to leading every situation. Olivia quietly checked nearby equipment, making certain every item the physicians might need was already within easy reach before stepping back once again. She never interrupted. She never attempted to influence the conversation. She simply anticipated what others would need before they realized it themselves. One of the younger residents thanked her softly. Olivia answered with a warm smile and continued organizing supplies. Hayes noticed the brief exchange and misunderstood what he saw. Believing Olivia was becoming too involved, he turned toward her once more. "Nurse Carter," he said in a louder voice that echoed across the treatment area, "stand down. The physicians are handling this." Conversations nearby immediately faded. Several nurses looked up from their work. Rebecca quietly lowered the chart she had been reviewing. Olivia met the surgeon's eyes without the slightest trace of resentment. "Yes, doctor," she answered respectfully. She placed the equipment tray on a nearby counter and took one calm step backward exactly as instructed. The room settled into an uncomfortable silence. Then something completely unexpected happened. Mason slowly straightened his posture on the examination bed. Every movement reflected years of military discipline rather than ordinary habit. Ignoring the surprised expressions around him, he carefully raised his right hand in a perfect military salute. Every physician, nurse, and resident froze where they stood. Mason's eyes remained fixed on Olivia alone. His voice was steady, filled with unmistakable respect. "Commander." The single word seemed to stop time inside the emergency department. Olivia's calm expression softened almost imperceptibly, yet she did not return the salute. Instead, she gently lowered her hand toward him in a quiet gesture asking him to relax. "Please remain comfortable," she said softly. "You are here as a patient." Mason slowly lowered his hand, but never looked away. "Yes, Commander," he replied with complete sincerity. Dr. Hayes stared in disbelief. Rebecca felt her heart begin to race. The younger residents exchanged confused glances, unable to understand why an elite Navy SEAL had just addressed an emergency room nurse with the respect reserved for someone who had once led him. No one spoke. No one moved. The only sound inside the department came from the steady rhythm of patient monitors as every person present realized they had just witnessed something they could not explain, and every assumption they had made about Olivia Carter had begun to quietly fall apart. For several long seconds, no one inside the emergency department moved. The silence that followed Mason Brooks's salute seemed to settle over every hallway, every treatment room, and every person standing nearby. Dr. Richard Hayes looked from the Navy SEAL to Olivia Carter, searching for some reasonable explanation that would restore the ordinary order of the morning. None came. Olivia remained exactly as she had always been, calm, respectful, and focused. "Please continue resting," she said gently. "Your recovery is the priority." Mason lowered his eyes briefly before answering with complete sincerity. "Yes, Commander." The respectful title echoed once again through the treatment area, leaving the younger nurses and residents exchanging confused glances. Rebecca Lawson quietly stepped closer, unable to hide her curiosity any longer. "Commander," she asked softly, "what does he mean?" Before Olivia could answer, she simply smiled with quiet kindness. "Right now, he is my patient, and that is all that matters." Her response revealed nothing, yet it somehow deepened everyone's curiosity. Dr. Hayes folded his arms, still struggling to understand what had happened. "Senior Chief Brooks," he said carefully, "perhaps there has been some misunderstanding. Nurse Carter has worked here as an emergency room nurse. I believe you may have confused her with someone else." Mason slowly turned toward the surgeon. "Doctor, I have served beside extraordinary people throughout my career." His voice remained calm, but every word carried unmistakable certainty. "I do not confuse the person who taught me what leadership looks like." The room became silent once again. Hayes attempted to respond, but the confidence that usually filled his voice had begun to disappear. Rebecca noticed that Olivia never interrupted the conversation. Instead, she quietly checked another patient's medication schedule, answered a family's question with reassuring patience, and thanked a volunteer who had delivered fresh blankets. Even after becoming the center of attention, she continued caring for everyone around her exactly as before. Mason watched her with quiet admiration. "She has not changed," he said almost to himself. "She always placed others before herself." Hayes looked back at Olivia. "If there is something I should know, now would be the appropriate time to explain it." Olivia met his eyes with complete composure. "Doctor, my responsibilities today are the same as they were an hour ago. Our patients deserve our full attention." She politely excused herself and walked toward an elderly gentleman who needed assistance adjusting his pillow. Her calm refusal to discuss the past left everyone even more intrigued. At that moment, the automatic doors opened once again. A middle-aged Navy officer wearing a neatly pressed service uniform entered the emergency department carrying a secure document case. He approached the reception desk, confirmed his identity, and then looked toward Mason. As his eyes shifted across the room, they settled on Olivia. He stopped walking immediately. His composed expression changed to unmistakable surprise, followed by deep respect. Without speaking, he straightened his posture instinctively. Mason noticed the reaction and gave a faint knowing smile. Rebecca watched the officer carefully, realizing that this was no coincidence. Dr. Hayes followed the officer's line of sight until he too was looking at Olivia. The officer slowly approached, holding the document case securely at his side. He paused only a few feet away from the quiet nurse, studying her face with thoughtful recognition before speaking in a respectful tone. "I never expected to find you here," he said softly. "After all these years, I finally understand why no one could ever tell us where our former commander had gone." The Navy officer stood quietly before Olivia Carter, holding the secure document case with both hands as though it contained something far more valuable than paper. Every physician, nurse, and technician in the emergency department watched the unexpected meeting unfold without saying a word. Olivia met the officer's eyes with the same calm expression she offered every patient. "Good morning," she said politely. "How may I help you?" The officer smiled faintly. "You already have," he replied. "More times than you probably realize." Dr. Richard Hayes stepped closer, unable to hide his growing curiosity. "Officer, would you mind explaining what is happening?" The officer nodded respectfully. "Within the limits of what I am permitted to discuss." He placed the document case on a nearby counter and carefully opened it. Instead of removing classified materials, he took out a single Navy recognition certificate that had already been approved for public release. He held it carefully without handing it to anyone. "Many years ago," he began, "our special operations community was led through several humanitarian evacuation missions by an officer whose calm judgment and leadership became legendary among the people who served under her. Official details remain restricted, but one fact has never changed. Because of her decisions, many service members and civilians returned safely to their families." Mason Brooks lowered his eyes respectfully. "Every person on my team trusted her completely." Rebecca Lawson listened without blinking. The younger residents stood silently behind Dr. Hayes, completely absorbed by every word. Hayes finally looked toward Olivia again. She remained beside a medication cart, listening with quiet humility instead of pride. "If this is about Nurse Carter," Hayes asked carefully, "why has none of this ever been mentioned?" The officer answered without hesitation. "Because she specifically requested that her military service never become the reason people respected her. She believed respect should be earned through daily actions, not past accomplishments." Mason nodded immediately. "That sounds exactly like our commander." Olivia gently smiled before speaking for the first time. "The people who served beside me deserve just as much credit as I do." The officer returned the certificate to its protective folder. "That answer is also exactly what I expected." Rebecca slowly shook her head in amazement. "You have worked beside us every day, and none of us knew." Olivia looked at her warmly. "I came here to become a nurse, not to relive another chapter of my life." Those simple words settled over the department with remarkable weight. Dr. Hayes found himself remembering every instruction he had given Olivia, every moment he had underestimated her quiet confidence, and every assumption he had made simply because she never spoke about herself. For the first time in many years, certainty gave way to reflection. The officer closed the document case and looked toward Mason. "Senior Chief, I believe we have finally answered the question you carried for all these years." Mason smiled with quiet gratitude. "Yes, I finally know where our commander chose to continue serving." Olivia gently adjusted the blanket of a nearby patient before checking another monitor, returning to her responsibilities without another word. Watching her move naturally from one patient to the next, everyone in the emergency department began to understand that leadership had never disappeared from her life. It had simply taken a different form, one built not on rank or recognition, but on compassion, humility, and the quiet decision to keep serving others every single day. The quiet respect that had settled over the emergency department continued to grow as everyone watched Olivia Carter return to her patients without the slightest desire to remain the center of attention. She checked medication schedules, adjusted an elderly patient's blanket, answered a worried family's questions with reassuring patience, and thanked a volunteer for delivering fresh water to the waiting area. Nothing about her behavior suggested that she believed herself to be extraordinary. If anything, she seemed determined to make certain the conversation about her ended as quickly as possible. That quiet humility affected everyone in the department far more than any dramatic speech ever could. Dr. Richard Hayes remained standing near the nurse's station, silently replaying every interaction he had shared with Olivia since she joined the hospital. He remembered correcting her in front of younger nurses, assuming her calm personality reflected limited experience, and believing that leadership belonged only to those with the highest medical title. For the first time in many years, he questioned his own judgment instead of someone else's. Mason Brooks noticed the thoughtful expression on the surgeon's face before looking toward the Navy officer. "May I tell them one story?" he asked quietly. The officer considered the request for a moment before nodding. "As long as you avoid operational details." Mason smiled gratefully before turning toward the hospital staff. "There is one memory I believe everyone here deserves to hear," he began. "Years ago, during a humanitarian mission, conditions became extremely difficult, communication failed, and our entire team looked to one person for direction. Nobody panicked because our commander never did. She listened before speaking, observed before deciding, and always made certain every member of the team had what they needed before thinking about herself." Every person in the emergency department listened in complete silence. Mason continued. "When everything became uncertain, she never raised her voice. She simply looked at each of us and calmly explained the next step. That confidence spread through the entire team. It reminded us that leadership is not measured by volume. It is measured by trust." Rebecca Lawson slowly smiled as she looked toward Olivia. "That explains why everyone feels calmer whenever she is working," she said softly. Mason nodded. "Exactly. I recognized those same qualities the moment I walked into this hospital." Dr. Hayes quietly asked, "Was she always this humble?" Mason answered without hesitation. "She never asked anyone to admire her. She only expected everyone to care for the people depending on them." Olivia gently approached the group after finishing with another patient. "Senior Chief," she said kindly, "your physician is ready to continue your evaluation." Mason smiled with genuine respect. "Even now, you are still looking after everyone else first." Olivia answered with a quiet smile. "That has always been the job." The Navy officer looked around the department before speaking one final time. "Many people believe leadership ends when someone leaves a position of authority. Today you have all witnessed the opposite. Real leadership follows a person wherever they choose to serve." Those words settled deeply into the hearts of everyone listening. Younger nurses looked at Olivia with admiration rather than curiosity. The residents who had once assumed she was simply another experienced nurse now understood they had been learning from someone whose greatest lessons had never appeared in textbooks. Even Dr. Hayes found himself realizing that respect could never be demanded through authority alone. It had to be earned through character, consistency, and the willingness to place others before oneself. As Olivia quietly walked toward another patient waiting for assistance, every person in the emergency department instinctively stepped aside, not because anyone instructed them to do so, but because they had finally recognized the quiet commander who had been leading by example all along. The atmosphere inside Bayside Regional Medical Center felt noticeably different as the morning continued. Conversations resumed, patient monitors continued their steady rhythm, and the emergency department returned to its demanding pace. Yet every physician, nurse, technician, and volunteer now looked at Olivia Carter through an entirely different lens. She noticed the change immediately, but made no effort to acknowledge it. Instead, she quietly walked toward a frightened young patient waiting with his mother, knelt beside him, and spoke with gentle reassurance until the child smiled again. Only after making certain they were comfortable did she continue to her next responsibility. Watching her move naturally from one patient to another, Dr. Richard Hayes realized the greatest lesson of the day had nothing to do with military service. It was about character. He slowly stepped toward the center of the emergency department and asked several members of the trauma team to gather for a brief moment. Nurses paused while documenting charts, physicians looked up from computer screens, and residents quietly assembled nearby. Even Mason Brooks and the Navy officer remained respectfully in place. Hayes looked directly at Olivia before speaking. "There is something I need to say in front of everyone." Olivia turned with her usual calm expression. "Yes, doctor." Hayes took a slow breath. "This morning, I believed leadership belonged only to those with the highest title in the room. I believed experience could be measured by what appeared on a resume or by the position someone held inside this hospital. I was wrong. The department became completely silent. Hayes continued. I spoke to Nurse Carter as though she only knew how to follow instructions. I failed to recognize the quiet confidence, discipline, and professionalism she demonstrated every single day. More importantly, I overlooked the example she had already been setting for every member of this department. Rebecca Lawson smiled gently, knowing those words had been difficult for him to say. Hayes continued with complete sincerity. Today I learned that genuine leadership is revealed through humility, compassion, consistency, and the ability to place others before yourself. Those qualities cannot be assigned by a job title. They are earned through daily actions. He turned fully toward Olivia. Nurse Carter, I owe you a sincere apology for judging you before taking the time to truly know you. Olivia offered the same warm smile she had shown every patient that morning. Thank you, doctor. We all continue learning throughout our lives. Her gracious response surprised many of the younger employees, who expected resentment instead of kindness. Mason quietly smiled. That answer sounds exactly like the commander I remember. The Navy officer nodded. The uniform changed, but the person never did. Hayes extended his hand without hesitation. Olivia accepted it respectfully. Around them, several nurses and physicians quietly applauded, not because anyone instructed them to do so, but because they genuinely wanted to honor the example standing before them. Rebecca looked toward the younger nurses gathered nearby. Remember this day, she said softly. Skills make someone successful. Character makes someone unforgettable. Olivia gently excused herself from the gathering after only a few moments. A patient had pressed the call button, and without seeking another word of recognition, she calmly walked toward the room, carrying fresh supplies and a reassuring smile. Every person watching understood the true reason she had earned such extraordinary respect. It was never because she had once held authority. It was because, regardless of where life placed her, she quietly chose every single day to serve others with dignity, humility, and unwavering compassion, proving that the finest leaders are recognized not by the rank they once carried, but by the kindness they continue to show. Morning sunlight continued pouring through the wide windows of Bayside Regional Medical Center as another steady stream of patients arrived at the emergency department. The extraordinary events that had unfolded only a short time earlier were already becoming part of the hospital's history, yet their impact remained visible in every hallway. Physicians continued reviewing charts, nurses answered call lights, volunteers guided anxious families, and the familiar rhythm of compassionate care filled the building once again. At the center of it all, Olivia Carter quietly continued her work exactly as she had before. She greeted every patient with warmth, listened carefully before speaking, and treated each person with the same patience and dignity that had earned the respect of everyone around her. She never mentioned the recognition she had received, never referred to her military service, and never behaved as though anything about her responsibilities had changed. To Olivia, caring for people had always mattered far more than being remembered. Dr. Richard Hayes watched her from across the nurse's station as she calmly comforted an elderly couple who seemed overwhelmed by unfamiliar medical procedures. He realized that everything Mason Brooks and the Navy officer had said was already visible in her daily actions. Leadership had never disappeared from her life. It had simply become quieter. After finishing his rounds, Hayes gathered the physicians, nurses, residents, and support staff for one final announcement before everyone returned to their assignments. The emergency department gradually became still as employees turned toward their director. Hayes looked around the room before speaking with complete sincerity. Today reminded me that every person who walks through these doors brings a story we cannot see. Titles, resumes, and first impressions never reveal the full measure of someone's character. From this day forward, I expect every member of this department, including myself, to lead with greater humility, greater respect, and greater willingness to learn from one another. Several employees nodded quietly. Rebecca Lawson smiled with genuine pride as she looked toward Olivia. Hayes then turned directly toward her. Nurse Carter, thank you for teaching this hospital a lesson none of us will forget. Olivia answered with her familiar, gentle smile. We all teach one another every day, Doctor. Mason Brooks quietly laughed. That is exactly why people followed her. The Navy officer closed his document case and prepared to leave. Before walking away, he offered Olivia a respectful nod. Wherever you choose to serve, people become better because you are there. Olivia thanked him softly, then excused herself because another patient had just arrived through the emergency entrance. Without hesitation, she walked toward the new arrival carrying a fresh blanket and a reassuring smile, giving her complete attention to someone who had never heard the remarkable stories being discussed only moments earlier. Mason watched her disappear into the treatment area before turning toward Dr. Hayes. Commander was never the most important title she carried, he said quietly. The most important one is the one she has now. Hayes looked toward the busy hallway where Olivia continued helping patients with the same quiet compassion that had first defined her years ago. He finally understood that greatness is rarely announced. It is revealed through countless ordinary moments of kindness repeated day after day. As the emergency department returned completely to its normal routine, every person who had witnessed the events of that morning carried away the same lasting lesson. Real honor is not found in applause, recognition, or forgotten achievements from the past. It is found in choosing, every single day, to serve others with humility, integrity, and compassion, proving that the strongest leaders are often the quietest people in the room, and that the greatest heroes never need to tell the world who they once were because their character speaks for them every single day. Thank you from the bottom of our hearts for staying with us until the very end of this journey. Your time, your kindness, and your continued support mean more than words can express. Every view, every thoughtful comment, every like, and every subscription help us continue sharing meaningful stories with viewers who believe that compassion, humility, and quiet courage still matter. Here at The Hidden Nurse, we celebrate the hidden heroes who choose service over recognition, integrity over praise, and kindness over attention. Our stories are inspired by the belief that the greatest acts of leadership often happen quietly, that the strongest people are not always the loudest, and that true character is revealed through everyday actions rather than titles or reputation. If today's story touched your heart, inspired you, or reminded you never to judge someone before knowing their full story, please take a moment to press the like button. Your support helps these stories reach more people who appreciate hope, respect, resilience, and uplifting storytelling. If you are new to our community, we warmly invite you to subscribe to The Hidden Nurse and become part of a growing family that believes extraordinary people are often hiding in ordinary places. By subscribing, you will never miss another emotional story filled with hidden identities, remarkable nurses, inspiring moments of recognition, unforgettable acts of compassion, and life lessons that stay with you long after the story ends. We also invite you to share your thoughts in the comments and tell us which moment inspired you the most. Your voice helps create a welcoming community where people encourage one another through empathy, gratitude, and meaningful conversation. Until we meet again in our next story, we hope you continue looking for the quiet heroes in your own life, because sometimes the people making the greatest difference are the ones who never ask to be noticed. From everyone at The Hidden Nurse, thank you once again for listening, for believing in the power of kindness, for supporting our channel, and for allowing us to continue sharing stories that remind us all that genuine greatness is measured not by recognition, but by the lives we choose to touch each and every day.